right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a chatty room today. I love it. I would like to call to order the March 24th, 2025 Lake Washington School Board Study Session. Let the record reflect that we have all school board members present and 2 of our school student representatives. Today, the topic is the high school day for our study session. It's an update. Dr. Holman, I will pass it to you.
So this is work that's been ongoing for 2 to 3 years now, and we're on the verge of transitioning to an implementation phase. We've been in a planning phase up to this point, and the planning continues as we work towards the 25-26 school year and engage students in a different class period allocation, but also a class school structure. And so tonight, Scott and a whole team is here to talk about some of the work that's been going on, some work related to the schedule, but also really the supports for students as we think about a 6-period day and wanting to continue a robust offering for our students. And so I will hand it over to my colleague, Scott Beebe, who has been a bit under the weather over the past few days and somehow pulled off a presentation and a communication today.
I have no idea what's going to come out of my mouth because I got a lot of cold medicine flowing through here, but I'll do my best. So if I say something really bad, just forgive me. I just want to, I did invite a team, and I'm going to have them speak first because they need to leave, but I just want to ground us in where we are sort of in process. So it was just in October, which seems like a very long time ago now, that we announced, well, not me, Dr. Holman announced that we were moving back to a 6-period day. We had a series of community forums at each of the comprehensive high schools. I met with all of the staffs at all of the high schools. Ended that process in December, and now we've sort of shifted into this new phase where we're building context for how the schedule was developed. We put a whole bunch of information online that a few people read, but in the responses to the emails that I've gotten, I try to point people there, but I just am responding to the same series of questions, which really is pretty well captured in that FAQ document as well. So I've put out a couple of videos. I put one out this morning. Well, I thought I put it out this morning, but I mailed it to the wrong address. And then once Shannon helped me figure that out, we mailed it to the right address, and that went out. Just providing some more context after a meeting with the principals last week, and at their advice, giving a layout of how time allocates across a week for a couple of classes, because there is a pattern to it, and it was an intentional pattern. And really the point we are now is we've moved into, or we're just past the typical registration timeline. So kids have been doing their registration for next year. That is our typical process in terms of building schedules and doing staffing, and we're following those same processes, whether it's a 6-period day or a 7-period day, with a couple of caveats that I'll talk about today. And I invited Nyla, Lise, and Jill. You may recall this little document, which was some of the policy work that's been done behind the scenes, and in some cases policies that didn't change at all, but we had very different application of policy across our schools. So Nyla, Lise, and Jill have been working both with our counselors across all of the high schools and middle schools, as well as behind the scenes gathering information in a single place so that our schools reference one place rather than having multiple different materials on how to access these opportunities, the flexibility that we're creating for kids. So I invited them tonight because they will do their work way more justice than I will be able to, and I think it's an important component as we take an opportunity to calibrate across the system that really probably needed to happen regardless of whether we change to a 6 or a 7-period day. So I'm really proud of the work that they're doing, and I wanted to showcase that a little bit for you tonight. So you just tell me when to click, and I'll be your clicker.
Thank you, Scott. Do I need to do anything here?
Yeah, press the...
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lise Christensen, and this is Jill Brown. We are your counseling specialists in the Lake Washington School District. We have a little bit of a different focus in our normal day-to-day. I have typically been in student services, working with social emotional learning and restorative practices, and sort of troubleshooting and helping counselors solve problems. And Jill was hired this year to be the graduation and career pathways specialist, so kind of the technical end of things. And just to give you a little bit of a layout of the timeline, in mid-January, we were asked, the both of us, to sort of pivot what we were doing and focus almost exclusively on the work of the 6-period day and what that means for school counselors, for the practitioners that are helping the students kind of make sense of what their schedules might look like, what their future plans might look like, given these new opportunities that we have provided them. So that's when this kind of started, when we really started putting our full-time work into this. It's included first identifying any possible misalignment in practice, as Scott mentioned, from school to school, and then developing common school supports. So first, sort of finding where those gaps or holes existed and kind of what people were doing in each of our buildings. We did this by gathering some baseline data around current practice and agreements and holding feedback sessions with administrators and counselors pretty regularly. We've been in schools and talking to teams a lot. To get sort of the baseline, where are we, right? And then we can start to identify what we need to change or shift. Our overall projected outcomes of our work include sort of more efficient, streamlined building workflows around these increased student opportunities in the LWC. So we all have a common mission, right? We're excited to share some of these updates with you. You'll see this is pretty text heavy, but it was challenging, I will say, to put together all of our work over the last few months in 2 or 3 slides. So I'm hoping that you will forgive us for the text heaviness of this slide. One of the biggest things we're really proud of is a common Running Start course equivalency reference document. This is something that counselors have been asking for a long time, Dale is like, right? We have been wanting that. It's those tools that we can sort of create and produce so that everybody can use them, they can find them in the same place, so that it sort of isn't a barrier anymore. It gets out of the way and the counselor can do the work with the students, right? So they're not tracking down which class or would this make sense or kind of recreating the wheel around these questions in a Teams chat. Instead, it's these are the classes that count, here's how they count, here's your reference document, and so counselors can use that to just move forward with the work with counselors or with students. Alongside that, we've launched an informative video. You will see Jill up there speaking in the video to guide families and students and families so that they can kind of walk through how do we sign up for Running Start? How do we begin this? We know that it's one of the options that's pretty affordable for our students, right? And so it's not completely free. Students have to pay for books and materials and labs and things like that. But we have funding resources for those students who qualify in that regard as well. So we really wanted to sort of emphasize Running Start and how can we make that a kind of clear pathway for students and counselors to happen. We also have really been highlighting the 2-for-1 credit opportunities, and particularly the example we're giving here is in CTE. Students can now take a 4th year of music and really just flourish in their interests in music and count that as a 2-for-1 in a CTE credit. The appendices.
Lise, can I just
go ahead.
Make sure I might ask some questions
Sure.
as you go through? And so I believe what that one means is I can take 4 years of music, and if that's my passion, I can also receive my CTE credit is it for 4 years, or is it one of those courses also? It's if I take 4 years of music, it then
the 4th
also
year.
qualifies for my CTE credit.
That's the one.
Okay,
Thank you for clarifying that. Yep. So we're sort of rewarding kids to follow their interests, right? Appendices updates that's been a big one. That has been one that we have been working on, getting lots of eyes on, revising again. And so we've been working on those appendices. Right now it's A through I. It was A through H, and those appendices are forms that you might be familiar with on the district in our forms library, and those are accessible they're public facing. And now they are matching new policy. so the language matches, and we've really tried to make the more student-friendly language, right? So kind of taking out the education lingo as much as we could to put it in terms where folks understand what we're talking about. And so we've done that, and we've also created fillable PDFs. So now we're coming out of 1992, and we're going to have fillable PDFs so that and we're continuing to work on our digital versions of these. So we're in process to make them even hopefully smoother than a fillable PDF. Is it 95? Yeah, and so that's going to be really welcomed on the staff side of things, and I hope on the student family end as well. It'll be a little less cumbersome to be turning in a hard copy form to your counselor and then waiting for that hard copy form to get uploaded. So we're really proud of those appendices. We've had so many eyes on them. We've edited them innumerable times to make sure that they're right. So when you get a chance for your own enjoyment, you should check those out in the Forms Library. They're pretty awesome. We also are looking at the process to excuse PE. That's Appendix E. That is a touchy one that a lot of folks have feelings about, and there's been committee work around it. We have our specialist working on that. And so we have, again, trying to really streamline the process part of it, implementing these ZZZ codes in our Skyward tool so that counselors can use that to track those waivers, or those excusals to PE. And then we're training staff on how to use those codes, find those codes, and run reports so they can keep track of what kids are doing what a little easier. We're also offering drop-in supports. So we are in between the more formal meetings, which we're having with each school team. In between, we're doing drop-in optional sessions for counselors and administrators, both for questions and sort of problems of practice as we move forward with this. So they always have an ear with us, and we can always sort of answer questions as they come up. Again, centralized, really proud of the centralized forward-facing information for families and students. Really still working on what those are going to be, and Jill will talk more about some of the specifics in the next slide, but that is, I think, one of the greatest outcomes is to be able to have it all centralized in one spot. Our schools can link to our district website for that information, and parents can access all of that. So there isn't any sort of guard keeping of this information, right? It's out there, it's for everybody to use and utilize. And then there's ongoing, so those are sort of new things that we're developing. Ongoing supports. We are continuing to help counselors make sense of these new changes. So where you have to sort of get creative with some of these things. So our students, are a lot of different kinds of students with different goals and situations that they're bringing. So helping with counselors to think sort of differently around what's possible for students, right? Beyond sitting in that classroom, in that desk, right? What's possible for this student? So working on kind of helping them with one-off cases, even for classes, the students that are going to graduate this June. We're also helping them with tracking credits and building some tools with credit tracking. That'll be a little bit more user-friendly, and Jill can talk more about that. Managing outside credits has been a real challenge for school counselors. They cannot be experts in all of these external programs that students might choose. So often we are asked as counselors to provide a recommendation for one program over another. That's very difficult to do, and people rightly feel uncomfortable doing that. We know our system very well, right? We cannot vouch for all those external systems. So really helping counselors make some sense of what this means for students, these outside credits, and helping counselors know how to have the right conversations with students and families around taking advantage of those opportunities. Managing internal district program credits, so again, more sort of managing, it's not an external program because they're partners with us, right? Running Start, WANIC, Worksite Learning, all of those programs. So we're meeting with those folks too outside of the district and having sort of calibration meetings, like how can we kind of utilize each other to meet each other's needs, right? What else did I want to make sure? The personalized pathway is an important one. really streamlining that process for excuse to PE, personalized pathway requirements for Art 1, where you can waive 1 art credit out of the 2, and you can waive 2 world language credits out of the 2 that are required, if that's in their high school and beyond plan as a personal pathway. So again, kind of focusing on really individualizing what the student needs and desires in this educational journey, and figuring out how to meet that need and earn credit, right, so that they can meet the needs of graduation as well. Working toward what does credit recovery and summer school option look like for students with our 24 credits and our 6 periods a day? Where is that room for failure, and where do we recover some of that? And so that's on the docket that's continual work for us to sort of figure out and work through. And the last 3 bullets are more work that's being done, updates with our mastery-based credit, making sure counselors are aware of those, graduation pathways, making sure that we know that students need to take the SBA and pass an ELA in math, or any number of the other ways to meet that requirement. Again, kind of helping counselors, there's just so much sort of to keep track of, helping counselors make sense of it and streamline it so it feels doable as advisors. And then the same with high school and beyond plan. And Jill has really been working hard on that, including, we love that there's that 1.0 elective credit that can be awarded as an elective credit for completing the high school and beyond plan. So that's a additional sort of gift that I think is a good thing for our kids and families. Okay, slide.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
You mentioned working with WANIC with the new schedule changes, and I was just kind of curious if there was feedback around how that's going. I'm assuming that they had kind of created their schedules previously to align with a different schedule.
Yeah. Well, they work with lots of different districts too. Do you want to speak to it? Yeah.
Yeah. It is a forever struggle with WANIC. When you look at 7 different districts and trying to create a schedule that will create as many opportunities for as many children in all of those districts as possible. And so that's why the WANIC schedule starts really early and the afternoon starts later. There are definitely challenges with our schedule, meaning the Lake Washington School District schedule. And it's important to know that that is one of the 7 schedules that WANIC is dealing with. And I think there'll be some bumps as we see the rollout, and we'll get to address those. But our new schedule is more conducive if for one part of the day than the other, and we'll see how that plays out with registration numbers.
Another factor is our start time for high schools. If we wanted to provide if we wanted to prioritize just access to WANIC, we would start our high schools probably around 7:45. Yet we prioritized a later start, and so those are variables that schools and families work through right now. It's true now, and it'll be true in the future. I don't think this schedule makes it any more or less accessible, especially with the change we did, the slight modification to the schedule. So
nope, it really doesn't. It's just a thing that our families are going to have to look at and say for each individual kid what really makes sense. Our later start time is actually beneficial because the kiddos can go in the morning and still make their afternoon classes.
Lindsay?
Yeah, thanks. In that previous slide, under the new tools and supports, under the drop-in sessions for high school counselors and high school admin, do you foresee this support continuing past this transition?
Sorry. Yes, that's something that we did no matter what was sort of on the docket of what was going on with counselors. As a COSA, I offer those kinds of things, whatever might be happening in counseling world or impacting the work, or students or families. Yes.
A difference though, Lindsay, like the PE waiver policy did not change. It actually was consistent prior and post 6-period day, but our application of it across schools was very different. And so one of the things I've appreciated, this just gave us an opportunity to take a look at things like that and make it more consistent. That was a lot of the feedback I heard early on from parents, even at the community forums, was about that. You know, what about the PE thing? At my school, we don't even have access to that, but they're allowing it over here. Why is that? So just even taking this as an opportunity to do that calibration, I think, has been an important step.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Lise. You did a good job summarizing. So what I'm going to share with you is kind of more detail regarding our progress. And it's important to note that we're working directly with our middle school partners to create something sustainable in practice for specifically Appendix C, which is the out-of-district credit. And the focus at that level is really in world language and math progression. So we're hoping to get buy-in at the admin level and with our counseling teams to find some practice that works well for them, not just tell them how to do that work or to use a high school lens, but to really think about their population. The appendices, you know, it's been eye-opening for me, just looking at all of that information and really collaborating with lots of different stakeholders. And so I feel very confident that Appendix C and specifically E, the PE waiver or excusal form, have had a lot of people vet that. And not everyone's happy about what the forms include in terms of, you know, programmatically what will maybe change, but I think that they can feel confident that there's an equitable and sustainable process in place for students and families at every building. In terms of building resources, internal and external, again, it's about alignment. And there's a document in the last slide that we provided that summarizes the state and district updates, really focusing also on the personalized pathway requirement. This is something that got activated in 2020 during the pandemic, and a lot of staff are not aware that that 1.0 of art and potentially the full amount of world language could be satisfied with alternative coursework depending on a student's plan. And so for students with an IEP, for students who are multi-language learners, for students who have had a disruption in learning, they've been hospitalized or had other reasons that have taken them out of the school setting, for a counselor, those tools are critical. And part of what our job is to do is to bring everybody in a building up to speed about that's something the state has provided to everyone. This isn't new. But it maybe hasn't been something we have accessed because we had the 7-period day. We had more flexibility in the past, and I expect staff and counselors will be utilizing that PPR, as we call it, more regularly. So in moving forward, we feel data is very important. We'd like to track where we see trends to help inform the district and also our buildings when they're making decisions about priorities with master schedule and other things that benefit and impact students. So this is a good share. We have had already 112 students identified who could benefit from the mastery-based credit. So what that is, just to clarify, is that if you earned a 3 or higher on the ELA or the math, or also earned a 3 on the WCAS, which is the science portion, that student could potentially earn credit where they may have failed the actual in-person course. So some students, at least all of these kids, have 0.5 available to them, some of them more. So that's a really big win in my eye. And our data team has already communicated to all the buildings who those kids are. So that work is in progress for this graduating class. As Lise mentioned, we're regularly discussing systems and support needed at the building level and getting awesome feedback. As we gather that, we're bringing that back to the district and really discussing those issues and trying to refine our practice. We're meeting with Lake Washington actually Wednesday. So we're kind of wrapping up that work, but I think that'll be something that we'll continue to value as we move forward. Yeah, so we're also intentionally partnering with our comprehensive school counseling program. So you may not have known, but there's a state mandate called State Senate Bill 5030. And this is where districts are meant to balance counselor work with what's called an 80-20 ratio, with 80% of their time focused on direct student service. And so Lake Washington has been a leader in this work, and I think that just having that lens as we move forward will be important. We're going to be providing counselors with ongoing support, trying to help them fully maximize the opportunities for on-time graduation, noting the new flexibility we're offering for students to fully realize their post-high school plans. So that kind of harkens back to what I shared about the personalized pathway requirement and other tools that could be helpful for those on-time graduation rates. So we have a number of community partners who've been invaluable to us. We're having active communication with Cascadia, Bellevue College, and Lake Washington Institute of Technology. They've been wonderful, and I think that we're looking at some flexible and creative ideas that may be coming our way. So Dr. Jen Rose is working on that with Myra Arnon in the Accelerated Programs Department. So lastly, internal tools are a priority. So our admin, counseling teams, IEP teams, and ML staff will really benefit from shared knowledge and really equitable practice that supports buildings and students moving forward. So I think next slide, and
We've got one question.
Oh, sure.
Shira?
Just a really quick question. So, like, you introduced a lot of new opportunities to, like, get credit. I was just wondering how colleges, or when you're applying, how they would see those credits and if they would accept them.
That's an awesome question. And specifically, the counselor will have to meet with that individual student to talk about their post-high school plan, because it could be more beneficial to take an online course, specifically like NCAA approved might be something that you're considering. For some students where just getting the diploma is right now the first priority, they may have more flexibility and feel relief that SBA is going to help them get across the finish line. Kind of depends on what led to the credit being lost in the first place sometimes to inform that. But definitely a student whose four-year college path will include meeting those standards for the CADR, so the distribution requirements required to apply, will be a critical conversation. And wouldn't be something I would want to do over email, right? It'd be a conversation you'd have with your counselor and probably your family. Yeah, great question. Okay.
Of course, we want to prioritize. Students are at the center of all the things that we're doing. So although this is sort of indirect student services, our hope is that students and families will feel this and feel a sense of sort of relief or sigh that we have some opportunity beyond the traditional ones we were used to. So we've prioritized student and family-friendly language, the ability to track the data internally, and ensuring the ease of access for all stakeholders. You can tell we're excited about these fillable PDFs because I put them in like 3 slides. So schools will link this to their own websites, allowing students easy access and independence in this process, because of course part of the teaching and learning that counselors are doing with students is sort of those adult skills, the skill building around sort of managing one's life and having these conversations and these decisions. So really hoping that students will gain a little bit of independence in this process, not to do it by themselves, but to be their own greatest self-advocates. Planning tools have been created for student use, and a couple of those examples are 4-year plan documents. We've actually asked that now Appendix Cs, which are the outside of district credits, that attached to that is the student's 4-year plan that they've worked out, so that this isn't a one-off decision. This is a decision that's measured. We've thought through our 4-year plan. We know where this fits. And so it sort of forces that thinking a little bit on the student and family side to require a 4-year plan along with that request. And also some example scenarios. So Jill has done an awesome job, and the last slide is the one after this that shows some resources, really creating, like, if you're this kind of, maybe you're this student, and maybe you look like a little like this student, kind of to walk families through, and counselors, helping counselors with this too, what examples might look like with this. We're excited about this one too. We're working with our district language access staff to make these documents available in our top 5 languages. Again, all about access, removing barriers. Okay, slide.
Okay, last slide. These are just some resources, so if you are bored tonight and you want to go look more deeply, we're sharing I feel really proud actually of the procedural guidelines. That's something we put together very quickly last week, seeing a need. And so sometimes that's kind of how we're working. We're recognizing something that is a tool that everyone would benefit from and creating it. So that Appendix C guideline is really a good example. I created this one-pager of all the policy changes, but also inclusive of the state information in case it was lost somewhere along people's kind of professional experience because of interruptions, again, with COVID and other things. Sometimes people are lacking that institutional or state level knowledge. The 6-period policy alignment timeline that just kind of lets you know what we're trying to piece together. And then the last thing is just, it's pretty rough, I will say. I will like to have it a little bit more fine-tuned before it goes on the website, but some student planning tools that include Running Start and some checklists for just looking at the grad requirements all on one sheet. So hopefully those will be beneficial. And I guess I just wanted to say that we're open to any other questions that have come up if you've made some notes, but let us know.
Thank you so much for having us and being partners with us in this work.
Yeah.
I put the giant question mark so you could ask your questions, and then we can let our friends gracefully exit.
Lisa.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you especially for the Running Start equivalencies. That's very, very, very helpful. Wish I'd had it about 2 years ago. Question, so students are now allowed to take up to 7 outside credits. Is that correct? That's official? Okay, up from 3. So it was 3 before, and now they can take up to 7. Okay, great. I hadn't heard that was official, but I'm glad to hear that because that just opens up a lot more opportunities for students. Also, for streamlining access, especially to community colleges, is Summer Running Start specifically a part of that? Especially sort of knowing, yeah, it's a challenging, again, 2 years ago, it was a very challenging process to walk through. There were just a lot of steps, and you have to go to the high school and the college and a website that's very confusing to navigate and so on. And for my student, that was okay because she was going to be doing it full time for 2 years, so it was worth that initial investment. But for a student who's just doing it over the summer, it would quite honestly be a lot. So is that something that you're specifically looking at, especially knowing that that's an opportunity that's open to students outside the school year, right? That it really might just be that they access Running Start just exclusively in the summer.
I'm glad you asked that. So the year that your student started was the first year they offered the summer Running Start. So that was also, the form is better. OSPI has improved the form for the counselor side, and I think also for students and families, so it's easier to navigate. I'm supporting the counselors and identify a common due date for the enrollment verification form. So that's the document that is billed for the courses the student's taking, and so that we can have a common date for all the comprehensive high schools and the choice schools. So I just felt like that was something that then their admin can support, and then where we would have flexibility are for students who may have failed a class second semester and needed to have a pivot and consider what they might do. But having that internal deadline, having all the information posted, having clear connections to the updated form for 25, all of that should be helpful. And I'm working right now on a common Running Start FTE calculator for the district. And with that, typically any student who's kind of taken almost like a full-time schedule, be it currently at Running Start or at a high school, you're allowed to take 10 credits. That's kind of the general thing, unless you have a pretty full docket of classes. So it's not as complicated. I think what happens, though, is that you look at all the text on that form, and it's very overwhelming. And so additionally, I'd like to kind of build in some Tier 1 approaches to Running Start in general that I have used in my practice as a school counselor for over 20 years. Like, I've learned a few things that can make these things a little bit easier to manage on both sides. So in time, I think we'll see some of that get refined and improved because it's complex and it can be very stressful. So yeah, thanks for that.
I think equally the navigating the college side of enrollment, because there's the district side of enrollment, but then there's the college side of enrollment. And that, I would say, was equally complex, especially as a parent of a incoming junior who had never enrolled herself in college before, and you no longer have access to any of it as a parent. And so there's that as well. And I don't know if that's true for, I'm assuming that's true for summer as well, that you have to go through the same registration
Yeah.
procedures on the college side.
Well, and the FERPA release form is something that I have highlighted in some of that, so that, you know, if your child becomes ill and there's nobody who's willing to talk to you, if that's not on file, those are things to know as an adult at home. But yeah, I think that's a few of our partners seem to have made some of their information more complicated than necessary. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but there are certain schools where their websites make it really complex. It looks like I have some affinity here with all of you, but I think that's hard, and that's one thing I'm hoping we can get back to, is having those partners actually come on campus to do, that was a model I had with Shoreline College, where they came and actually helped students pick their fall quarter classes on campus. And so that was a lovely partnership, but those places to grow.
Any other questions? I had a final one. I was curious kind of what feedback you're hearing from counselors as they're helping students navigate creating their schedules for next year.
I think that counselors really are very much in favor of common information that everybody is sort of leaning on, right? Rather than those one-off decisions that make people really nervous, this program or another program, or this way or this way. Having some common understandings across all the buildings is helping counselors feel a little bit more confident in giving and advising, in listening, in figuring out what student and family needs are, and just sort of not getting out of that stuck thinking, a little bit more growth mindset, right, around what's possible for the students. That's change. Change is hard, and there's a lot of change happening at once. I would say that it was rough in the beginning, and I think with, we've been very intentional listeners, and so we have gone into the spaces and really tried to, be there to hear all of the concerns, really be transparent with the rest of the buildings around our note taking, and so sharing those notes with each other, sharing with administrators, making sure that everybody sees what the other school notes were, so they can sort of organize themselves too around what are those common issues, so they don't feel like something, we really don't want to be doing to them, right? We want to be doing with them, right? They're right along with beside us doing this work, and so I would say that they are very excited with some of the new tools that are coming, and like to Scott's point, this is work that really needed, a lot of it needed to get done, and this has helped us to identify what actually needs to get done in more specific terms and address it.
Thank you. Director Stewart?
This presentation is very informative, I think, for parents who are befuddled, to put it mildly. I'm wondering, despite the fact they can go online and look at tonight's presentation, have you all considered the idea of perhaps having an online presentation to parents, kind of a give and take, Q&A, just the idea of how to feel better about your own student and the situations they're facing? Just a thought. I could see parents running towards this if they could. Just thought.
Mark, I think we were just sidebarring. We've talked about that. Their work was so new in January that we didn't want to commit yet to that, but that's something certainly we can talk about.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity moving forward?
I think a lot of parents would really appreciate it.
The conversations with Cascadia and Lake Washington Tech and Bellevue College, some of that feedback, Lisa, is part of those conversations about how do we streamline this process for our kids. And I know there's requirements on both sides, but just bringing them into our space would be a great first step.
Put it this way, I just texted a parent who'd been on my coattails about a lot of these changes, and I said, go look at this video real quick. as soon as it finishes.
Well, I wanted to make another point to your question is I think this is also something that can be embedded in like a sophomore junior planning night, something that's already occurring. And so if a family realized that, hey, I could pivot from that credit of art and take intro to engineering because that's my pathway, ooh, that's cool, I can fit it in because I only have 6 periods. So there's a lot of relief when you see how you can manipulate your schedule, and knowing those tricks and kind of what's available would be awesome. And so that's something I'm going to suggest. But I think right now we have to get all of our systems kind of, ironed out and then be able to present that.
Yeah, fear of the unknown makes it, becomes exponential in the fear.
So we were super fortunate to have Lise and Jill willing and able to jump into this work this year, because I do not know how we would have been as responsive as they have been and counseled our counselors along through this process, because I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate all of the work you're doing and continue to do on their behalf, because it's about putting the kid in the middle and making flexible options for that student based on what they want. Shira, to your point, that those counseling conversations are part of the 80% of direct service. Those conversations with students and their families are part of that comprehensive counseling model. And so reframing our thinking around some of that too is work that Lise and Jill and Nyla have engaged with on our behalf. So I want to honor their time and let them go so you can listen to me drone on for a little bit longer about schedules, but just thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It does look a lot different on the screen. It's a lighter blue on my screen. So I just wanted to put this, you guys can slide now. I just wanted to, you're all leaving? Great, party's over. I wanted to put the schedule back in front of us just so we understand that this was not something that just happened. This work started last June and involved principals, counselors, teachers, voices from students, voices from parents, continuous feedback. We continue to get feedback around it. And there was a lot of intentionality behind how the schedule was developed. And I'll talk about some of that as I go through the rest of the presentation. But there were some decisions and some interests that sort of drove the way the schedule developed. One was, and we heard this throughout bargaining 2 years ago, that intervention time, the way we were doing it in many schools, was I have a class full of kids, I take more kids, and then I have to work with some kids while I'm trying to manage 30 others. How can we develop a schedule that gives time within the school day for kids to receive extension or support from their own teacher? And so that interest was one of the primary considerations. The other one really was around, and we had lots of conversations around block versus no block. A traditional high school schedule is way easier in terms of development, and I'll share later, it sort of locks you into a certain style of interaction with content, classmates, and teacher. That was intentional to protect the block time and to make it not be consecutive days. And that was based on feedback from both teachers and students that that's just a lot to have a block class and the very next day have that same class again for a block. So to do that across a week meant that you're really allocating 4 days to block days, and they have to be alternating. The other piece that really drove the conversation, and I put this in the FAQs, but I just want to reiterate it, we got pretty direct feedback from both kids and teachers to not make Wednesday the all period day, because the periods get so short, it just really doesn't have a lot of meaning. So that meant Monday or Friday, because and that was going to make Wednesday a block day, which really drove the length of the blocks and did some other things that created some of the difference in our schedule versus what perhaps is typical. So one of the things that our principals have been working through with their staff and with students when students engage with their principals around this is how does learning actually lay out across the week? And there is a pattern to how the learning lays out. So those block days, the longer 80-minute periods, are never consecutive days. They are either Monday, Wednesday, or they're Tuesday, Thursday. And the all-period day, or the all-period day is Fridays, so you have 2 blocks and a 48-minute class on Fridays for every class. What's different in our schedule, and we had some debate at Cabinet this morning over whether to call them this or not, but is this floating period, which doesn't necessarily occur in the same sequence for every class. That's why we call it floating, although floating sort of implies that it's different. It isn't. If you notice, the color changed to yellow because that is just additional class time allocated across the week. And originally that was a shorter period, but when we put, and it was intended for that academic support intervention time, but when we shortened the blocks to 80 minutes, it lengthened the class, and it actually made it the same block of time, really, as your Friday class. So you really have 2 blocks of time you're planning for across the week, 2 80-minute blocks and 2 45-ish minute blocks. The difference is that floating period doesn't necessarily occur in the sequence the same way for every period. So here's another example. And somebody emailed me this afternoon, one of our teachers, I believe, that there was a typo in the example that was in the video, and I'll share that with you now. The 9:30 to 10:50 in the video for Tuesday said 9:30 to 10:05, which was a 35-minute class instead of an 80. But it isn't, it's an 80-minute class. So on period 2, again, Tuesday, Thursday, so the sequence is 2 80s and the 48 on Friday. Their floating period, though, has to occur on Tuesday. Or on Monday, sorry. I told you I got a lot of cold medicine on board.
We got you.
On Monday. So that puts things in a slightly different sequence for that period 2 than period 1. So it really comes down to how you're going to use that 45 minutes. And so our buildings are doing a lot of work around that and thinking with their staff around how they might use or choose to use that, even based on different content areas. So what is this 45-minute floating period? It really is just class time. So this is an example that Redmond High School put together. I am not an AP Lit teacher. You wouldn't want me to be your AP Lit teacher. But this is an example of an AP Lit and how the sequence would play out across the week. So I've intentionally kept it blue just so we know that that's the 45-minute. It is just class time. So our 2 80-minute periods for period 1 occur on Monday and Wednesday, and this teacher has planned multiple activities in each of the block classes to engage students differently with the content. Some of it's reading aloud, some of it is journal writing, some of it is group work and producing presentations, which then are going to get presented on Friday. In this particular sequence, the teacher has chosen to use the 45-minute period for a different activity that's not necessarily related directly to the work on Hamlet in this class, but is important in the context of the AP course. The AP exam is a high-stakes exam that occurs, I think, in May. I'm looking at you two, in May. Almost all of our kids take them, and you want to score a 4 or 5, really, because that's the credit that will transfer and or help you with the GPA recalculation when you're applying to colleges. Yeah, 5s.
For ours.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a conflict in my family over my oldest daughter, who's a doctor, who got a 3 in the chemistry exam, and my son, who got 5s on all of them, but he only took the ones he knew he was going to get the 5s on. Yeah, it's kind of cheating. Anyway, so this particular use of the 45-minute period is perfectly fine and was the intent of the time that was built into the schedule. We intentionally made classes the hours longer so that teachers had the opportunity to look at their pacing and not be so pressured around cramming content in at the exclusion of other opportunities, including intervention and academic support, extension like this is, and a host of other things. Let me see if this works. Oh, look, I changed the color. I did that this afternoon. So it's just class time. It's teacher discretion. Now, I promised the principals I would say that individual buildings do have opportunities in their individual buildings to work in their, they call them building decision-making models, to say, okay, as a building at LDUB, we're going to use the 45-minute block or even the Friday block for this purpose. And they would have to agree to that using their building decision-making model. They have that flexibility. They had that flexibility before 6 periods. They have it now. It's part of their negotiated agreement. But there are lots of ways that 45-minute period could be used that don't necessarily add to the complexity of the week. So you could supplement current class material. That might be the day I bring in a speaker, or that I bring in additional content that's outside of what we typically would look at. I could review material from prior lessons that I did some assessment and my kids didn't do so great on, so I could reteach. I could, for classes that have large multilingual populations, I could pre-teach some of the vocabulary or content so kids had greater access to it when we approach that content. Dr. Homan very wisely this morning pointed out that the problem really is at the beginning of the year. Because at the beginning of the year, your sequence isn't necessarily 80, 80, 48. You're going to, some classes will start with 45. So we have to think of that over the course of more than one discrete week, because it will start to balance out over time. Makeup work and test corrections continue to be a question I get from teachers a lot. They could allocate a 45-minute period for, hey, you know what, we got a whole bunch of people that are missing work. This group, I want you working on this. This group, you're going to come over here with me and I'm going to reteach this part. Test corrections, I had a great conversation as part of a parent complaint last year around assessment practices and how he really wanted his student to be able to learn from the mistakes she made on it was a programming exam. And that could be an opportunity to have kids do that. That is a great opportunity for learning, to understand what, not just what you missed and, you know, get the X on the paper, but to understand why you missed it and be able to rethink that, relearn that. Or it could just be extra time. It could just be used as regular old class time. You could plan a lesson and do whatever you wanted to do in that. Redmond High School at their last LEAP day, and I borrowed this from Jill, spent some time in groups having different groups of teachers think about that, I'm just going to quote it every time, floating period, and what they might use that for in different contexts or for different content specialties. And I just thought it was really interesting to see how teachers have started thinking about this. When this concept was hatched by the technical work group, it was really interesting to see the teachers initially sort of, wait a minute, that's way outside the norm. And then shifting their thinking about, well, you know, I could use it this way, or I could use it this way. And there were 2 teachers from Redmond High School who were particularly, you see the light bulbs come on for both of them, and were particularly instrumental in moving that idea forward. So this is just some examples. There's some overlap. Independent research, AP, prep, gamification, extra practice time for music or drama.
I see escape rooms and speed conversation rounds. Those two seem very, I don't know what either of those really would be in the context of class, but it sounds awesome.
Well, it's more for the gamification. Speed conversations is what I'm doing right now. I already talked about some of this, reviewing extra project time or collaborative work. Independent reading, book clubs. That's an idea we used to run. I'm an elementary teacher and principal. We used to do book clubs all the time at elementary school with different groups of kids reading different books and being able to orchestrate those conversations. Learning is a collaborative process, or it should be. And what we did was build a schedule that provides extra time to allow teachers flexibility to do that. I will say in our 7-period day, the classes were shorter, there were more of them, and the pressure that we heard from kids around academic workload and their teachers, and the counselors have left, but the counselors around how they're interacting with kids who are just feeling overwhelmed all the time by the pace of life was part of what drove the conversations around scheduling. So this came up, this was the subject of my little talking head, really bad video that I sent out this afternoon, or that Shannon sent out for me this afternoon. Although the deep voice I really kind of liked, so I hated it less than I normally do. This feedback is really what we've heard most consistently that really was throwing people, which was the non-sequential numerical sequence of the periods on Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. The committee did that intentionally because they tried to put the 45-minute block at the end of, or the 45-minute period at the end of the day. And that was largely based on the perception that we have a lot of kids who leave early because of our later start time, and so the implications of missing that were less than if they missed part of the block time. And that caused some unintended consequences around, I heard from a lot of students, particularly seniors, who were, or juniors who were planning to be seniors, who were planning to take 5 periods instead of 6, and that really messed up their ability to do that because you had to come back for 4th. So the other place where we saw an unintended consequence was around sharing of staff. And while we were able to work that out in some instances, part-time staff or staff who are working part schedules or partial FTE became really challenging with that flipped class. So that was the decision we worked with principals to make, is that we are going to move those periods into sequential order. So 4th, 6th, 5th, 6th, Tuesday, Thursday. So now juniors, you can stop emailing me. You can take your, you can take, and I just want to make sure, it is not my schedule. This is a collaborative effort, and I facilitated the group. Yeah, let me off the hook a little. Now that creates another complexity that we're going to have to work through, and principals in our conversation, Dr. Holman and I met with them, I don't know, it was a couple of Fridays ago, and then we met with them the day that we went on the board retreat, Dale and I did. The conversation is around that 4th period is going to be a long chunk of time for some kids. If you have second lunch, it gets broken up a little bit by your lunch period. There also is still a 10-minute passing period between that, and principals felt like there were some creative things they could do in the master schedule that might actually let classes who really could benefit from that long time prioritize that in the master schedule. So they're willing to engage both with their staff and in how they build master schedules to mitigate that issue. And we're going to have to work with teachers, so it's just not, I can't do the math, 125, 2 hours of lecture, because that is not productive for the teacher and it's not productive for the students. So that change was communicated this afternoon via my talking head PowerPoint video, and a message went out both to staff, we sent it to students also, although many students do not check their email until they're emailing me, and then also families. Oh, sorry. You can ask any. All the way up. So I never know whether these quotes are real when you find them, but I like this one, so I'm going to say it's real, and it's attributed to Socrates, and it's around just this idea of change is sort of inevitable at this point. This is our schedule. This is what we're moving forward with, and we can focus on fighting the old. We are moving to a 6-period day. It is changing, or we can focus on building the new, which is what we heard from our counseling friends today, was this creates a unique opportunity for us to do some calibration and resetting around how do we recenter the student in the conversation. So our work moving forward, we've made that sort of technical adjustment to the schedule. That is the schedule we're moving forward with. We got a lot of other feedback. We got a lot of other schedules. Yes, you can fix the fourth period, but you got to have 2 blocks on consecutive days, so it breaks that other priority. And just there's a even number of periods on an odd number of days, and so that complexity just I don't know how many permutations of schedules we went through to try to fix that, but it was a lot. I even threw it into ChatGPT one night for about 4 hours trying to get it to tell me, is there another option here? And it kept coming back to the same options everybody else had said. It would always put 2 blocks back to back, or double up a different period on a different day. So our ongoing work, we've had great conversations with our partners from LWEA around the impact of working conditions associated with move to a 6-period day. That is a change for our teachers. We're wisely having conversations about how we support teachers into teaching in blocks. While all of our comprehensive high schools had some form of block schedule, they didn't all have a 2-block, nor did they have this schedule. So how do we help use this as an opportunity to really talk about what we're doing in those classes that's productive use of time and engages students differently? And I'll share with you, I think it's on the next slide or maybe the next one, an example of that in the new Danielson framework that is the basis for teacher evaluation. There's changes in that that really align with the new schedule differently than in the past. And I had an example at the risk of sharing too much, but we know that up throughout the year, teams are meeting with families and writing IEPs for the following, they go for a year typically. And there's a service matrix attached to that really is driven by what the schedule of the school is. Well, we're changing the schedule on everybody for next year after many of those IEPs have been drafted. So there's going to need to be an amendment with a new service matrix attached. And some of those will be super simple. Some of them will be very complex. And so we've been working with our partners at LWA to think about how do we adequately build compensation in for the teachers that are going to have to do that work. That is a working condition. It's a one-time sort of cost in the implementation that we don't think will have to continue after that because we won't be changing schedules every year. I wanted to reiterate the importance of leap time. We got a lot of feedback around the addition of days to the school year, and we've communicated around it's not just number of days, it's instructional hours, and there's requirements that we have to meet. And protecting the time that teachers have to collaborate, particularly in our high schools, around the work leading into next year was important. Because if we're going to expect teachers to do something different, we have to give them time to interact with each other, learn from each other. We're having some great conversations about how do we orchestrate some cross-building collaborative opportunities. So teachers from different buildings, because 2 of our schools were doing 2 block days and 2 of our schools were doing 1. How can they cross-pollinate and share some of how they structure that time differently? We have Canvas implementation also going live next year, which should help with some of the communication because at least we'll be consistent across our classes in a learning management tool that really is designed as a learning management tool. We're getting feedback around that too, some concern about leaving Teams, although Teams will have a place. It just won't be the where we're posting assignments part of it anymore. And then really some work around alignment of central office support. So I sent out the video this afternoon, and within 10 minutes, our professional learning department sent me a document that they've been working on around supports for teachers in block schedules. So and you saw Lise and Jill, this was not their job until January, and we shifted their role for this year and perhaps into the future, at least for the short term or medium term, to be focused really on supporting this transition for our counselors and the students and families. And then this is where I wanted to share with you, this is an example of how the framework and the evaluation framework for teachers is changing. And I will be completely honest with you, I do not think you evaluate yourself to greatness. the purpose of the Danielson framework was to engage in ongoing conversations about practice with teachers, forever striving towards improvement of practice. Now, I know there's times that you have to get into the evaluation conversation, but it really is meant to be a tool to help teachers increasing sophistication along a whole host of very complex practices that are part of teaching. But this is it. So this is the rubric for engaging students in the new Danielson framework. And if you look from left to right, and you think about, I just was thinking about my high school experience today. I actually called up, I was a transfer my senior year here to Redmond High School, and they made me take Washington State history because back then you couldn't waive it. So I come as a senior and I'm plopped into a class with sophomores, because back then it was 10, 12, in Washington State history from one of our former principals' dad, Ray Cassidy, who was a teacher at Redmond High School forever. But I think about the practice that existed in those short, pretty typical 45 to 50-minute periods. And it was teacher shared some content, we did a little bit of work, bell rang, and we were off to the next class. That would not be in the new Danielson framework considered even basic performance. That really leans towards the unsatisfactory performance. If you look at the time necessary for teachers to be proficient and to really engage students, it's going to require a higher level of interaction with teacher and students to students, and students with content. So when I shared that Hamlet example, that was actually done by our principal at Redmond High School, who was an English teacher. And she really thought carefully about, how do I use an 80-minute period with multiple experiences for kids to engage kids differently than me just sharing content and them doing work. Now, I know our teachers are doing that now and they work very hard at it, but this is a different way of thinking about our practice. And the new Danielson framework is littered with this kind of shift towards student-centric, individualized work. And if we're going to expect that of our teachers, we've got to structure our time in a way that allows our teachers to do that. So ongoing work, there's been lots of conversation around reinvestment. So when we released the decision to go to 6 periods, we said part of that decision was driven by cost of the 7-period day, which was around this year $9 million to run that one extra period, because it requires an additional 61-ish FTE or teachers to add that 7th period. So we said we need to recoup half of that cost and reinvest the other half. So we've had lots of circular conversations with multiple groups around how to best do that. We do not believe that all of that should be driven from a district level. The needs of the buildings are different. So the conversations we've had with principals is really, how do we allocate some of that reinvestment, or the bulk of that reinvestment, right when they're getting their staffing, so that they have it from the start, rather than building a master schedule, potentially laying people off who don't need to be laid off as part of a reduction in force. We're trying to get to some decisions so that we can allocate that early and provide some guidance. So I wanted to share with you the guidance. This isn't verbatim, but this sort of gives you a sense of what guidance we've given principals as they look at these reinvestment of FTE. So it's really allocation of FTE to the building and looking through the priorities from Tier 1 to Tier 3. So Tier 1 was really focused first on barriers to graduation. We have kids who are on a sequence who are going to need a class that we probably, or I won't say probably, we may not have offered otherwise, but this group of kids needs it because that's, they didn't have the room in their schedule to not take it. So we may have to offer some classes that we otherwise wouldn't have. There are specific courses required for graduation. We need to make sure that we're offering those or continuing to offer those. World language is one of those. Arts classes are one of those. CTE classes are some of those. We have a commitment in our school district to increase access to general education and reduce barriers to access. So co-taught classes, both for multilingual and students receiving special education services. That would be a priority. So schools have figured some of that out in various ways, but this gives them some additional flexibility to say, well, if I had a .2, I could run one more section of English and spread this out, and maybe have the same teachers teach 2 sections instead of 1 section. You know what I mean? They could create some economy of scale that way. Tier 2 was really look at broad impact driven by your data. So we know that there are specific courses that are barriers for many of our students. Algebra is one of them. English 9 is another. And so what if we took some of that reinvestment and made those classes smaller? Because the only way to make a class smaller now is to make another class bigger. So if we had some additional FTE and we could make that class smaller without impacting others, what might that do for a broader cross-section of kids? Because part of what you're hearing with the academic support built into the schedule was we want to make sure kids are on track from the start, and we're not having to remediate, retrieve credit. We need to accrue it and maintain it from there. So that was the second piece. And then to look at some of those high interest courses outside the traditional day, those 0 and 7, for unmet needs. So this was an example, I think one of the principals shared it, that they may have a section, they may have a group of kids, enough kids to take a class, well, it's AP Chinese. I don't think we offer AP Chinese, but AP Chinese. But that group of kids, their schedules don't align such that they can actually offer that course. Well, that might be, they might reach out to those kids and say, hey, would you be interested if we were able to offer this as a 0 period class, if we had the FTE to do that, and someone actually capable and interested in teaching it. Because that's the other part of that coin, is in order to teach high school, there's a real complexity to the endorsement that you have to have in order to offer that class. So there's complexity in that. And then really tier 3, or sort of tier 2 and into tier 3, was to support those innovative programs and or to seed new experiences for kids. So we may have a great idea to try something. The Flex Academy that Juanita High School started this year is an example of that. Having a little additional FTE allocated to the building gives you some flexibility to try something like that without blowing up your whole schedule or impacting a whole bunch of other classes by increasing their class size to try that. So we wanted to provide sort of a fence around a big pasture and allow the schools to choose their path in that pasture, so to speak, without completely locking them into, well, it has to be this, and it has to be this, and it has to be this. So the schools have some flexibility to work with their staff, and that's the other guidance that we gave was, there's language in the contract around master schedule building and engaging your staff in that. These conversations should also include staff, but what we're trying to avoid is individual people feeling like they have to lobby for their thing or their job. Because that is not, it's not okay for the person having to do that, nor is it okay for the leader, because that just causes a lot of friction in a school. So this is a question that we've also been asked, is what are we going to do to evaluate our change? So we've done some thinking about this, and really about one of the concerns that was voiced when we made the schedule change, or when we proposed the sort of minor schedule change, was, well, we don't want to open the door and just have everything blow up on us, because there was a lot of work and intent put behind that. So how do we evaluate without saying we're just going to every year try to reinvent the wheel? So what we're talking about really is more of a continuous improvement cycle, which aligns with our strategic plan, and collecting data over time, both empirical, sort of quantitative performance data, changes in patterns of course taking, for lack of a better word, changes in courses that occur. So we looked at some of that when we did the 7 periods day study. We looked at how the number of AP classes had changed over time in our schools, and the different ways kids were accessing different programs within our schools. And so that's the plan, is to pull a representative committee that really is going to work through next year and probably the following year to collect that data and look at it together and provide input into, here's what we're seeing the impact of this work being. And that may lead to conversations about things that need to be adjusted, or it may not. It may just inform future work moving ahead. So we're planning to form that committee. I want to work with Dr. Krieger just to look at what metrics we might be able to develop and or collect in a dashboard that we could sort of have that coming along the whole time. Some of it's already captured, I think, in the results policies, but I think we need to refine that a little bit. And Mark has a question.
Sure. Quick one. Given the parent angst, let's say, for lack of a better term, is it possible that in that committee that you could include some parent input?
Oh yeah.
Because I could see them saying, okay, you've had all this change, and I can give you, or I and 2 or 3 of my friends can give you the input on how it's affected my student or her student or his student. And it might be kind of from a different perspective. It might be very helpful for y'all.
Yeah, the intent would be to bring students, staff, and staff would be teachers and counselors and admin, parents, perhaps some community members together, like we did for the 7 period day. Now, it got challenging over the course of the year. We had people come in and out of that, but what I appreciated about the people that sort of stuck with it is they really got deep into understanding and having conversation around what they were seeing in the data. So that's the intent, is to get a group of people collecting information, but really trying to understand what's the underlying message in that information over time. So yeah, Mark, it will include parents. And do you like my little gear thing? I spent an inordinate amount of time Sunday afternoon trying to figure that out. Yeah, thank you. I need to, or I felt the need to put in front of the board just the work that's occurring here over the next 3-4 weeks, because at the heart of all of these decisions, at the end of every decision, there are people involved, and the next 3 to 4 weeks, there are going to be impact to individuals' livelihoods and futures that are going to be difficult, not just for the individual, but for the system. You want the people who work with children to care about other people. That's kind of an important concept for teachers. So these are people who care about their colleagues. We care about their colleagues, contrary perhaps to some public opinion. But the staffing sheets for secondary schools go out March 26th. That's this week. That's the initial staffing. That's the work that we did this morning in cabinet with Barbara to ensure that we're putting as much front load in the staffing as we possibly can. We're not holding a whole bunch of staff back. Now, that's slightly different than we've done in the past. We're trying to get some decisions made about what staff we can allocate as part of the reinvestment right from the front. So that'll go out on March 26th, and then April 2nd, staffing sheets read for middle and high schools. I have no idea what I was writing there. That's cold medicine speaking. I think they're due back. Returned, I think was the word, yeah.
Because they think they come back to us.
They come back, yeah. So principals get them, they get some time to look at them, they come back, and that starts the process of, we call it surplus, which is sort of a perhaps insensitive word, but it's where do we have more staff in what content area than we think we're going to need at a building. So we start having those conversations. This year that looks a little different because there's more people impacted, because we know that we're reducing staff by some number associated with the 7 period day. That's going to result in information coming to the board on April 7th. I think we have a meeting on April 7th with, we had some debate in cabinet this morning around, the resolution is actually called a reduced staffing resolution. Colloquially, we all know it as a RIF, or a reduction in force. That will come to before the board on April 7th. So there is not a lot of turnaround between when we get the staffing sheets, HR starts engaging with where are the surplus, who needs what, where can I place people, what are the extra staff that are coming back that we're going to be able to place. And Michael Clark, who is the person that's responsible for that work, is queued up and ready to go just as soon as we start getting those staffing sheets back.
The reduced staffing resolution, the board has received that, I think, the last 2 years, and it's about numbers and FTE by category. It isn't about individuals at that point.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. On April 8th, we're pulling schools, principals together so that we can be more efficient in trying to place people. So Dr. Holman has a math teacher he's going to have to surplus, but I need to have a math opening. Well, we could place that person there. In the past, that's all been done one-off, and so we're trying to economize it this year by just getting in a room and sort of doing some of that work, or as much of that work we can do. And then HR begins their work to move surplus around. That may impact some middle school staff. Our contract prioritizes continuing contract over provisional. So if we had a continuing contract at the high school level and a provisional person at the middle school level that had the same endorsement, could teach the same thing, that continuing contract would take priority over the provisional. Our hope is that with attrition in a large system, we will minimize the number of people we actually have to give those RIF notices to. So towards the end of April, we finalize the moves and we confirm what positions we're going to have to reduce. That comes to the board. The notices would be passed out May 2nd. Comes to the board for approval? Yeah, approval on the May 5th board meeting. The timeline we have to meet is by May 15th. You don't have a board meeting anywhere between, that's the last board meeting before May 15th. We will continue placing people even after that. So let's say we have 10 teachers that are going to be part of that RIF process that we have to give notices to. They stay in the employment pool for a year, and as openings occur, we reach out, and they're in their endorsement areas, we reach out and offer the position to them. Once they have, I think, 5 days, 5 days? I don't remember. I don't remember how many days it is. Nani, do you remember? I think it's 5 too. They have 5 days to respond. Most respond way quicker than 5 days. And if they don't accept that placement, then they're removed from that endorsement pool. They can stay, like I might be dual endorsed in English, social studies, and I don't want to teach English. I really only want to teach social studies, but the English job comes open first. They offer that to me. I don't really want it. I'm going to wait for a social study. They have the option to do that. They're only removed from that one endorsement. And we will continue to place people throughout the whole next year to try to hang on to our people as much as we possibly can. But that May 5th, there's just going to be a lot of angst in the system here over the next couple of months. And I wanted the board to be aware of that, because when we start having these conversations, both centrally and in schools, there's going to be, rightfully so, people who are upset and wounded as a result of that. So that was my update to the board.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Sorry. Shira.
Okay. I'm going to start with a positive. switching the fourth and the making the sequential order. I think that was very beneficial and is going to benefit a lot of students. My one question is just I know that there's been concerns about having consecutive block days. And at least at LW, for example, when we have a school week of 4 days, we will always have our schedule will go odd period, even, odd. So we do have that kind of back to back, and at least I haven't experienced any issues. So I would wonder if there's more opportunity to look into switching the third and the fourth block, just because I think that having 120, how many minutes? 120 something minutes on just one day would not be a lot only for students, but also for teachers. For example, teachers that have fourth period will have one less day of planning than other teachers. And then also just students, their engagement won't be as strong. So currently I have AP Calc BC for fourth period, and if I was in that class for 120 minutes, even with that 10-minute passing period, I don't think it would be beneficial for my learning or any of the students around me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, and that's part of why the conversation around how we use that 45 minutes, that's why I put so much in this around that, because it doesn't necessarily mean that it is 2 straight hours of what we do in class currently. Does that make sense? And we actually did have a conversation around that very, I don't remember which two we were flipping, but third and fourth, on putting them on different days. And again, we came back to the technical group did not want to have consecutive back. And it's a negotiation. It's not one school, because we're trying to have a comprehensive schedule across the 4 schools. We did not have agreement to do that. So this is the schedule we're moving forward with for next year. Now that's part of what we'll think about as we move into next year. If I'm a high school teacher and I get fourth period planning, that huge chunk of time is kind of awesome, because I can do a lot in that big chunk of time. Now that does mean I don't have it on another day, so I'm only getting 3 days of planning in that week, but there's
trade-offs.
There's trade-offs to everything. Yep.
I think that it will just depend, because I know that my AP Calc teacher would utilize the 120 minutes, and I think there would be a lot of variety in how teachers decide to utilize it, whether that just be for work time or continuing the lesson, which I feel like a lot of AP teachers would.
That's part of what we discussed with our principals, and that's part of the work that's going to need to occur in every building. We built a schedule that has, so I calculated it by day even to see what how many hours does each credit count based on which day you go to class. And I think the average is 150 hours. Our previous average was 135. We've added 15 hours of class time to every class. So what I kept hearing from AP teachers also was that they cram it in because they had to get so much in before the test in May. We've given them more time now to do that, so that they don't necessarily have to go at the same pace they've always gone at. But I'm not an AP teacher, so. Good question. Yeah.
For the students that have first lunch, how does this passing period work in the middle of fourth period on block day? Does the teacher just kick them out for 10 minutes? Is that what it is?
Say that again?
Well, so I'm just looking at the schedule. You have the 10-minute passing period, right? 11:30 to 12:50, and then 1 to 2. Am I in outer space right here? There is a 10-minute passing period in the middle of the class. What does that look for those students look like? Do they do a lap around the school and come back to the classroom?
Go to the bathroom?
I heard someone say Starbucks, but
Yeah, I heard
we
someone
we wouldn't recommend that in 10 minutes.
Yeah,
but I guess you could pre-order, and but yes, it's to grab a snack, it's to walk around, there's a break between those 2 instructional blocks. So Lake Washington High School right now is a 20-minute nutrition break in the middle of their schedule right now.
Yeah.
And so maybe a good question would be for us to ask Lake Washington, what does a nutrition break look like in the middle of your schedule, which would be similar to a 10-minute passing period for a class that's returning to the same class.
During my nutrition break, I do go to Starbucks, as do many others.
But it's a time just to get up, walk around.
But 20 minutes is a lot different than 10.
It is, but you still could get up and walk around.
Like, I could go home in 20 minutes.
Yeah, but you probably wouldn't go to Starbucks in 10 minutes, but you could grab a snack out of your backpack. You could walk down the hall.
But I could get like a snack out of my backpack in class as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to put a stop to this conversation. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not on that. I guess it's not. No, I do not have a follow-up. I have an additional question, so I can wait if somebody else has something.
Just ask your question.
Could you give me one more time the rationale for moves for the change that we're making now of having periods in sequential order?
I had it on a slide. I just don't remember which one it was. Yeah, it's really around this.
It's all of those things.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no one. Reason.
And from a senior's perspective, it allows them to have an early release.
Because sixth period then is always the last on the days that you have sixth period.
Okay. Thank you.
Suniri?
I don't know if I read the new schedule right, but I know on Friday it's called homeroom / personalization. So is that supposed to be what students use as flex right now in school, or?
Every school calls that something different currently. Like it's wolf time at East Lake. I don't remember what it's herd time at Redmond High School, but part of why I called it Rue time. Yeah. So every school uses that different, and part of that, there's contract language around how the school decides to use that time, and so that's why I called it homeroom personalization, because that aligns with what's in our contract.
So that's the only time left up to student discretion in the schedule, right?
What do you mean by student discretion?
You can choose what class you want to go to and what you work on and stuff, rather than
It entirely depends on the school making that decision. That isn't a student-driven decision. That's the staff at the schools have made that decision.
Okay.
Yep.
I was just wondering, I'm assuming that some schools at least are going to use that as wolf time or whatever, but I feel like it's not enough, because at least for me, and I know for Shira as well, right now we have 90 minutes of that, and that's actually really helpful because things like test corrections and absences, you can make those up along with a lot of club work you can get done in school, or one-on-one teacher time. And then I know in the floating periods, we were intending on using those as test corrections, but I feel like a lot of teachers won't do that because things like test corrections and making up absences and stuff are things that aren't applicable to a lot of the class a lot of the time. So then teachers feel it's not really useful to say 45 minutes for test corrections when only 1 or 2 people need to do test corrections, which is why, at least for me, most teachers ask you to come before, after school, or during wolf time. Mm-hmm. So I feel if we only have, how much is it, 40 minutes of that, it the original intent of changing the schedule was to take pressure off students and make it less fast-paced, but I feel it might add pressure as an unintended consequence, because now students have to figure out when they can come before school or after school to meet their extenuating circumstances, and then also that's affected by if they're taking 0 or 7 period classes, when do they get that time?
Mm-hmm. That's a fair point. Part of that's driven by the requirements around what counts as instructional time, and homeroom, that time does not. So you can only have so much of that before you can't meet your instructional hours requirement, and we allocated more to the passing times to create those more frequent breaks throughout the day. So that was a decision. That could be something the committee looks at though too. We did, if you remember, when we did the student and family survey, one of the questions we asked was about the frequency of that homeroom time, and we got wild. There was no consensus around what was the best time for that. 1, 2 every day. Yeah, go ahead.
Why the decision of 10-minute passing periods instead of like 7-minute passing periods? And how would a change to 7 minutes influence the schedule?
Well, it would blow it up, but because you have to reallocate that time back to class time somewhere. The 10 minutes was really around what is a break versus what just does it take to get from one class to the other, particularly at Eastlake and Redmond High School. So they are already on 7-minute passing periods because the Eastlake in particular, the hallways are so crowded. It's hard to move between classes. So the committee worked on that and intentionally held to the 10-minute passing time.
And then another one of the concerns with just having that such extended amount of time in like period 4 on Tuesdays, how would we, consider either student absences or teacher absences? I've like kind of pre-read some of the written comment, and it was like a concern about consecutive teacher absences. So how does that look like on a day for Tuesdays, and how could that influence or impact students and or teachers on those days? When would they be able to make up work if their makeup period is on that Tuesday that they missed? Does
On the Friday at the 48-minute? I mean, that's part of what teachers do now is they have to figure out how to sequence work across weeks or multiple weeks. We are collecting some additional data around teacher absence because one of the questions we have currently, because teachers have 2 planning periods in the 7-period day, we believe that teachers are more likely to cover other periods because of that. So we had some conversation around, could we split the 40 minutes so rather than take the whole 80 of my planning time, I might cover 40 and somebody else covers 40. So we're working out, what do you call them, emergency sub-plans building by building. We're also asking principals to now share those, which hasn't always been the case. They haven't been shared across buildings for sort of unique ways that they solve those problems.
But wouldn't the 48-minute period can be considered instructional time and like not a floating period? And
all of it is the same. It is all considered instructional time.
So how would you expect a student to make up a test on that Friday if they're in class and they don't have that extra like flex time that Suneri was talking about? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I answered the why there's not 2 flex periods, and not every school does that currently. Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the reason for teachers to work with one another is they're going to also have to make new decisions around how that plays out, because using the current framework for everything we do isn't going to work. And so there's going to have to be changes in how everything we've talked about plays out in school. And as Scott said, the evaluation of this will also be getting feedback around all of these components, because there's a potential this might actually work out better than the current schedule. Like that potential is there. Or there could be elements that are really beneficial, and there's maybe other elements that we would want to look at modifying. And so that's why we need to give our teachers some time to unpack this and do this work. They're already starting to do that, but it's going to require all of us to say, okay, well, this is our current normal. Like, this is what we do right now. Moving forward, it's going to have to shift. And it can't just be on students. You have to come in before school. It's like the only way. I have a young man in my household who can't do that either. And so it's like trying to work with his teachers to, make something up if he's not in school or whatnot, because he misses all of his homeroom because it's all in the mornings, and he's at Bothell High School in the mornings at Wanak. And so, those are other reasons why students don't have access to, makeup tests and things like that. And he still needs access to that, and he can't do it before school. So.
Lisa.
Can you go over the reinvestment piece? Am I understanding right that it's essentially that schools will be given some extra FTE that they can use, that principals sort of have flexibility to figure out how that extra FTE is best invested in the context of their school? Is that a fair summary?
That's
of what
part
you're
of
saying?
it. There's other aspects that are part of negotiations that I didn't talk about yet. because they're part of negotiations. And there's some things like we're having conversations around credit retrieval and how do we allocate funding for things like that, because currently that's hitting the buildings differently. Another one that we've looked at is, we talked about this when we were doing the community forums, is rolling activity buses again. So we know the cost of that's around $45,000 per bus. So if we ran one at each school. So those other things that we're talking about were part of that. The bulk of it, though, goes back into the reallocation back to the school. So when we do those, we've talked about we'll centralize that rather than having each school have to pay for that.
Got it. So it's like there's a chunk of the $5 million or so that's going directly to the schools. We know that, and then there's a chunk that's still sort of off to the side. Is that a fair understanding of where we're at this moment in time? Okay, thank you.
Suniri.
I just wanted to make sure, like, I'm understanding the 0 and 7 period offerings correctly. I know, like, nothing is set in stone about those yet, but would that just be like taking another class, but technically like before or after official school hours?
That's what it is now. We have 0 and 8 period classes now. Not in every school and not the same in every school, but.
So then will that be centralized, like across schools, like all schools will have?
No, because it's so dependent upon what the need is. I mean, can you actually fill a class before or after school? Do you have somebody to teach it? So just because we want to offer it doesn't necessarily mean we have a teacher to teach it, particularly with some of the more obscure kinds of electives.
I think, like, I'm not sure if this is true, but I just have never heard of it at Eastlake, so I didn't know, like, if we had 0 or 7 period offerings. But my main question when that came up was, like, how equitable is that? Because at least in my opinion, like, it really does give you a leg up if you're able to have like another like class, even just one more class a year. Like, that's 4 more classes. That could be 4 more AP tests. That's 4 more credits and like thousands of dollars you could save in college. I feel like it does make a difference, but there are a lot of students who, like, they can't come early or stay late because they have like obligations to their family, or like especially younger students who can't drive, or students that don't have access to a car, and or like if public transportation doesn't run on the time. Like, I feel like it could put a lot of students at a disadvantage when it comes to that. And then my other thing, which I brought up in my last question, was that, like, when we do have 0 and 7 periods, how does that affect the students who take that teacher's classes in like regular instructional hours that would need to come before school to make up a test or get one-on-one time or something like that, because that teacher would be teaching the other class and things like that. So I was just like overall wondering about how equitable it would be to offer 0 and 7 periods, especially because it's not like centralized across schools. Or can the student from Eastlake High School take a 0 period offering at Redmond High School or something like that?
Currently, we don't do a lot of cross enrollment, and I mean, just the traffic alone, I don't know how you do that. We do offer, I'm pretty sure there's 0 period at Eastlake. Most of them are band or jazz band, those kinds of things tend to be 0 period classes. The activity buses is another way to try to make some equitable decisions. So if we offered some 7 period classes now, that could provide transportation so kids could actually get home after those. So yeah. There's other ways too to take those additional, you can now take online Running Start or summer Running Start. There's other ways that you can add to your credits. And I'll, just as a parent of 3 kids who each did different aspects, so I had one Running Start, I had one college in the high school, and I had one sort of hybrid college in the high school AP. All of them took credits. Technically were junior status when they got to college, and still took them 4 years to graduate, because most of those credits don't actually meet the requirements in the majors that they chose. So they might, like my son at UW this year has skipped over a calculus class because he took BC and got a 5 on the exam, and so he skipped the first quarter calculus and into the second quarter. But so they don't always translate in the way that we kind of hoped they would as parents, because we were doing the same thing as, hey, bank them all now because they're free. Well, freer than college tuition.
And it's Redmond and LW have 7-minute passing periods. At least that's what the schedules they have online.
All right, I think we're done with questions. All right, thank you very much for going through that. I know there's been a lot of community interest, and I know our students in particular had a lot of interest. Since there are no other agenda items, the March 24th, 2025 study session is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.